Coups, conflict, and COVID. For many, 2021 was a year to forget. The world saw several dramatic transitions of power where the status quo was upended, while other things refused to change, no matter how much we wish they would. I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers' Highlights of the Year. It was a year of political upheaval where several long-standing leaders bowed out, albeit not always gracefully. In January, Joe Biden began his presidency with a promise that the era of Donald Trump was over and that Washington was going to re-engage with the world. But aside from a deepening rift with Russia, a failed rapprochement with Iran, and an alliance with the UK and Australia, which infuriated China and some European allies, it's been hard to see clear evidence of progress. Biden has effectively maintained many of the same policies as his predecessor, for instance, in detaining migrants from Mexico and maintaining close ties with Israel, which saw its own end of an era with the departure of decade-long Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But barely a week into 2021, the world witnessed scenes unprecedented in modern U.S. history when a mob of Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol building in an effort to prevent Biden from being declared the winner. Take a look.
We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol. Because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
For months, President Donald Trump told supporters the November election was stolen, a baseless claim and one that has been repudiated by courts across the country. Yet he used it as a clarion call to action that turned into deadly mob violence. Rioters stormed the very halls of power that represent the people in this democracy, halting the routine constitutional process that was taking place to officially declare the winner of the election, Joe Biden. Shots were fired inside the Capitol. The Confederate flag was paraded through the building. Trump loyalists declared this was their house. The president eventually called on his supporters to leave, but not before telling them he loved them and that they were very special. This attempt to disrupt the peaceful transition of power was stopped. January 6th, 2021 is a date which will live in infamy. Many Americans, and indeed the rest of the world, are left to ask, just how did it come to this?
Well, the Capitol riot left the U.S. reeling, and as committees formed to investigate exactly what happened, one thing was certain. The events of January 6th had both exposed and further contributed to a deeply divided nation.
It should have changed America, but I think all it did was expose what America is and some of the issues that we have in this country in terms of our political divisions. We just heard a whole bunch of distractions and not being able to stay on the subject and talking about all kinds of issues.
Not a distraction.
It's very interesting. Excuse me, I'm speaking. I think it's interesting even that we're calling it a riot and not an insurrection. The fact is that was an insurrection. If you look at the definition of an insurrection, that literally fits that definition. It is a violent uprising against an authority or government. And that is what exactly happened on January 6th, and we need to discuss it that way.
It means to accomplish the goal. It was an unarmed occupation of a building.
Targeted, attacked. Excuse me, I'm speaking. I gave you an opportunity to speak. I think you should do the same.
Try to stick to what factually occurred, okay? There was not an insurrection when no one's armed.
Okay,
and
Jason, let's let Jason finish his statement.
History 101, sir. You didn't go to History 101, Mr. Johns.
Jason, finish your statement, and Michael Johns will get back to you. Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, people were armed. If he had listened to the testimony, people had bear spray. You just showed footage of people hitting people with poles and breaking windows. I don't know where he thinks that's not being armed. If I came to his house and hit him with a lead pipe, I guess because that's not a gun, that's not an arm. But I suppose people have different ideas of what armed is and what dangerous is and what violent is. And actually, some people actually testified earlier. There are 500 people with charges against them, and some of them testified to spraying chemicals at the police. It's funny how, number one, you bring up Ashley Babbitt, and I actually think that they should release the name of the man who shot Ashley Babbitt in the name of transparency.
No,
I think that
should be part of
we
this
should
testimony.
should be
part of this
should
investigation.
be consistent. And again, if Kevin McCarthy wanted testimony or to talk about some of the issues that the other guest is bringing up, he should not have taken all of the people off of this committee.
Some of the police officers who testified described the siege on the U.S. Capitol as an attempted coup. But the world was shown a textbook example of a coup d'etat just a few weeks later in Myanmar. On the 1st of February, the military blocked roads, detained politicians, including Aung San Suu Kyi, and seized power. In response, anti-coup protesters rose up, but were brutally repressed. Armed civilian groups began to form to defend democracy, but under General Min Aung Hlaing, the army stepped up its attacks. Now, the UN warned that the lack of a collective and decisive international response will prolong the crisis.
The international response against the military coup and Min Aung Hlaing has been really disappointing. Rather than taking actually effective action, they are debating about whether Burma is becoming a failed state or Burma is going to descend into civil wars. There are so many effective actions that they can be taking. They are not. They are, condemning the military coup, and it hasn't stopped the violence against the peaceful protesters. And we are over 3 months of living in this fear now. Violence is the main thing that military know, and they know that very well, and they keep using against peaceful protesters and other activists for more than 3 months now. They thought that if they use violence, it would stop people from coming out on the street and protesting, but they have been wrong terribly. And we are seeing more protests every day. They're more creative in their protests. Despite some shortcomings, civil disobedience movement in the country is still going strong. So people in Burma, they know that there are a lot of dire consequences if they go out on the street, not only risking their lives, but also financially by taking part in CDM. But they are also asking for international community to help. But really sad thing is that the UN Security Council has failed to do their job. And they failed to protect the people inside the country. And, you can put out statements after statements, but it hasn't got any effect on the Burmese military generals. And they know, and they have a sense of impunity because no proper action has been taken against them, even with the Rohingya genocide in 2017. So human rights organizations across the world are calling for different action, and they need to take them.
One of the most alarming stories of 2021 was another takeover by force when the Taliban retook control of Afghanistan. Rounds of negotiations failed to reach a conclusion, and as US-led forces abruptly ended their 20-year military campaign, Afghan security forces collapsed and President Ashraf Ghani fled the country. It prompted thousands of Afghan civilians to seek asylum abroad. And even though the Taliban promised they would rule differently than during the previous reign, there's been little evidence of their talk of reform on the ground. Barely 4 months on, the population now faces extreme poverty and even starvation. 4 months before the Taliban took power, I sat down with the foreign minister of Pakistan, the country many said was key to negotiating peace with the Taliban. Shah Mahmood Qureshi believed then that a power-sharing government that included the Taliban would eventually run the country.
You could, if you could have,
I'm not saying there's a simple solution.
If you could have defeated them, you had all the means. You had the technology, you had the resources, you had the money and the force. You could not, right? If you could not defeat them, and they, over the years, have also realized that Afghanistan is not the same. Now, if the Taliban think they can turn the clock back, I think they are wrong. They will have to accept the new realities of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is today democratic. Women in Afghanistan have a role, and you cannot lock them in, and cage them anymore. Girls want to go to school, and that should be respected. So that is a new reality. That is a new reality. Both sides have to recognize this reality, and in my view, the Taliban have to, and other elements, extremist elements, anywhere, they will have to give up, move from the bullet to the ballot.
Right. I understand that you have your ideals, and it makes perfect sense. We can all relate.
We believe in that.
Of course, we all do. Unfortunately, the Taliban is not a rational group. They never have been. They have a mindset that dates back really to the Middle Ages. That is just not rational. You've said before that you somehow know the Taliban want peace, in large part because they are fatigued.
Because the nation wants peace.
Okay,
the people of Afghanistan want peace.
They don't see the nation of Afghanistan as theirs. They see the nation of Afghanistan as a nation controlled
by
foreign forces.
You see,
and
they're Afghans.
They're not
aliens. They're not aliens. They're not outsiders. They're Afghans. And they want peace.
That's fine. That's fine. Afghans want peace. We're talking about the Taliban. And
they're Afghans as well.
They are Afghans as well, but Afghans with quite a different mindset that was considered a legitimate terror organization that you say has changed. But I mean, what people argue is that their fighting is what defines them.
Give them an opportunity to change.
Okay, if we give them an opportunity
if you keep fighting
to change,
them, if you keep fighting them,
I'll cede you that.
If you keep fighting them, will they change?
I understand. I'm going to cede you that. For now. Many people don't believe they can change, but I will cede you if they do change, if you believe they can and they are given this opportunity. What happens when a democratic Afghanistan goes to elections and the voters choose not to recognize the Taliban in any government? Do you think they'll respect that, or will they return to the fight?
The Taliban claim that they are popular in the people. Why don't they test their popularity at the ballot box?
Okay.
And if the people of Afghanistan do not vote them in, right, we will respect that.
Will they respect that?
Well, they ought to. They ought to.
Well, they ought to. But again, we're not dealing with a rational group. And when they believe, having to fight a war for 20, 30, 40, even 50 years,
you see,
only guarantees them eternity.
Even irrational elements have to respect public opinion. Don't you think there are irrational people all over the world?
Not quite like the Taliban.
But the majority leads the way.
You are very much betting that this is a leopard that can change its spots.
I'm saying there is no other way. If there was, why didn't you try that?
And I'm saying
what was stopping the world to achieve what it wanted to achieve? Right?
I understand you're saying there's no other way, but
Could you get peace through a military surge? Right? Now, the question is, a decision has been taken. The world is tired. They're fatigued. They are in the COVID-19 phenomenon, right? Their economies have contracted. Mm-hmm. They have spent trillions of dollars and lost lives. They've said, we have done our bit. We have done our bit. Now it's for you, the Afghans, to play your role. Mm-hmm. As long as we are secure and they feel confident that they've broken the back of that extremist element to sort of go beyond Afghanistan to harm them or to hurt them, right? They have that ability is no longer there. Now, the rest, Afghans have to decide what kind of a government they want, what kind of a political dispensation they want. Who are we to tell them?
2021 was a year military coups returned to the African continent with a vengeance. From Mali and Guinea to Sudan, and even, many argue, Tunisia, the nation held up as the Arab Spring success story. But what dominated headlines was the civil war in Ethiopia, where government forces battled rebels from the northern Tigray region. November marked a grim anniversary of 1 year since the conflict erupted. In that time, violence that was once mostly contained spilled into other regions, plunging Ethiopia into a humanitarian crisis.
One thing is for sure, they do not want TPLF to be back. Let's not forget TPLF has been ruling for 27 years, and there is a reason why they are no longer leading the country. It's because of the Ethiopian people have revolted against them. And the revolution is very, close. So it's not like it's been a decade, it's only been 3 years. So the Ethiopian people have fought for this change, and they have actually voted the current prime minister. Over 36 million people have voted this current administration. So they are willing to defend that TPLF is not going to be coming to reverse anything. I mean, in fact, it's like everyone in the, on the ground cannot fathom TPLF returning. It's almost like impossible.
Okay.
No one will be able to be administered by a government, ex-government, current rebel group.
Well, Elo, let me get to you. I can see you do disagree. Now, we mentioned that you had actually voted to nominate Abiy Ahmed for the Nobel Peace Prize, but you have since very much changed your mind. Is that to say, then, that you think the people in the capital in particular, that Ledette was just referring to, are actually more in favor of the TPLF advancing on the city, or is it not one or the other necessarily?
Let me just say that I think, we are today standing on the first year anniversary of this, since the start of this war. And it was an entirely needless, completely unnecessary war the Ethiopian government, the prime minister, decided to go into, and plunges the country into the kind of chaos and massive humanitarian disaster that we see. Now, events have changed quite dramatically over the course of the last 1 year. Initially, the assessment on the part of the prime minister and his partner in Eritrea, the dictator Isaias Afwerki, was that if Eritreans could march from the north, Ethiopian armed forces, the various militias that are associated with the armed forces, go from south to the Tigray region, then that's a small region, and therefore the war could be completed within a very short period of time with the capture of Tigray. But of course, things didn't pan out the way they planned. It was a massive strategic miscalculation. We now find ourselves at a point where the government is on the defensive.
Well, our most watched episode this year was our look at the eruption of tension at the Poland-Belarus border. A humanitarian crisis unfolded at the edge of the European Union in November when thousands of would-be asylum seekers from the Middle East tried to cross into Polish territory. But it wasn't the only European border that saw an influx of arrivals who were not welcomed.
These are the key flashpoints in Fortress Europe. The latest crisis has been unfolding at Belarus's border with Poland, as thousands of asylum seekers from Iraq, Syria and Yemen face razor-wire fences in freezing temperatures. At the EU's southeastern edge, Greek coast guards have been filmed illegally pushing back refugee boats towards Turkey. Greece is building new camp facilities on its islands that aid agencies are likening to prisons. Further west in the Mediterranean, increasing numbers of people are making the deadly journey from Libya to Italian islands, seeking protection. More than 23,000 of them have been returned to Libya this year, to conditions the IOM describes as unsafe. In the Western Balkans, Croatian authorities are accused of forcibly returning asylum seekers who try to enter from Bosnia-Herzegovina, the majority of whom are Afghans who fled the Taliban. Meanwhile, people hoping for a new life in the UK are crossing the channel in record numbers. 98% claim asylum upon arrival. But the British government is reportedly working on plans to fly them to offshore processing facilities in Albania.
So it was the standoff at the Poland-Belarus border that caught the world's attention, and the circumstances surrounding that surge triggered accusations from opposing sides that Poland was shirking its legal and humanitarian obligations, and that Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko had manufactured the crisis.
I haven't seen anything like this before. This is obviously a very serious escalation of a crisis that has been going on since the summer, since August. In the summer, the Polish government referred to this as a hybrid war. This was, small groups of migrants being escorted to the border, trying to get across in ones and twos or small groups, gradually escalating over a series of weeks. But this, I think, is a major upping of the ante on this. I mean, huge groups of migrants on the Polish border, and I think when you're in situations like that. I mean, obviously, the border guards in Poland face a serious challenge in terms of maintaining the integrity of the Polish borders. But there's also the danger that a spark can set off a much more serious conflict in that area. So I think the Polish government is taking this extremely seriously. It views this as a major hostile act by Belarus, part of a campaign it's been running. For a couple of months, but a really serious escalation of that crisis.
Lukashenko, I believe, threatened it more than 5 years ago that he will use migration, illegal migration, as a tool against European Union if they don't behave. And the European Union at that time behaved. They lifted sanctions in 2016, and now they are facing consequences because this is started not in August. I have to correct my colleague, Alex. It started in spring with the migration crisis on the borders with Lithuania, and it was escalating and developing and reaching the scale that we are seeing today. And I agree that it will be, we have to expect further escalation and something even more serious from Lukashenko.
Well, as the world enters a new year, many will be hoping for the same thing as last year, an end to the coronavirus pandemic. 2021 saw a vaccination rollout unprecedented in modern history. But COVID-19 refused to go away as the emergence of new variants jeopardized vaccine immunity. There were protests against restrictions and criticism that poor nations were being left behind. And the final weeks of the year were thrown into disarray by the highly transmissible strain called Omicron.
Unfortunately, COVID won't forget us. COVID wants to be in our bodies and spreading from person to person. On travel, we certainly don't like travel restrictions, don't like bans on travel. We do ask that people take precautions, so wear the masks, get vaccinated if you can, ensure and ask the airlines and so on to ensure that they take all the precautions, and that, of course, countries manage their borders, understand who is going where, who's come in, who's come out, how to follow up people, and ensure that they can track and trace and test. So we ask all those things, but on actual travel restrictions, this is not something that we like to see. It's really important to make it clear we're not against boosters, we're against vaccine inequity. What we do know is getting the most high-risk people vaccinated with their first dose is the most important thing you can do. First and second dose, so they have a full course. So you've alluded to that already, that there are, even in countries with a lot of vaccines, we still have significant pockets of people who've not been vaccinated at all. And this could be for a bunch of reasons, not just because they're afraid of the vaccine or they don't like it or they've been listening to misinformation. It may well be that vaccination wasn't available the day they went to their doctor, and they're not somebody for whom going to the doctor is an easy matter. They may be somebody who works daily for their food, and they only have enough money to put food on the table if they go to work that day. If they lose a day of work waiting for a vaccine, they can't feed their children. So they've made the decision to feed their children before getting the vaccine. So there's a lot of work all of us in public health have to do in every country to understand why we have people who've not yet received their primary vaccine. And that's in countries with lots of vaccine. Now, we know in countries with hardly any vaccine why they're not getting it. That's because the supply around the world has not been fair and has not been fairly distributed. That is improving. We've been able to distribute way more doses of vaccines in the last month than we have in the entire year. So we're doing a lot better now with the distribution. But it is critical that in every country, instead of ignoring the people who are unvaccinated, that work to reach them. And it's the hardest last 9 yards. But it's critical because, again, when you have a virus racing through your population and infecting so many people, it's that small percentage but large number of people that will get the severe disease and sadly will die.
Well, thanks for watching this special edition of the Newsmakers, revisiting our highlights from 2021. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at @the_newsmakers, and do subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. Happy New Year, and see you again in 2022.